And I want to welcome everybody to our expert webinar today, Applying Lean Principles in Your Work and Career with Laura Hendrix, the SVP and Director of Enterprise RPA and Process Improvement and Quality at First Horizon Bank. And Laura has just told me a short while ago that First Horizon is being bought by Dominion Bank. Is that correct, Laura? Oh, you're on mute. I'm sorry.
So there we go, Stuart. It's TD Bank, Toronto Dominion Bank in
Toronto
Canada.
Dominion Bank. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. So her life is a constant whirlwind of excitement because they just finished a merger with another bank last year. So today, when you have questions for Laura, please put them into the Q&A box. We'll queue those up and we'll take them in the question and answer period at the end of the webinar. So we can have the conversation without too much interruption, but we'll throw an eye over to the chat and Q&A during the session, but we will be queuing up the questions, so please don't panic if we don't answer them right away. And we will have questions for you. And the first question is just pretty basic. How much work experience do you have? We're talking about general work experience since you graduated college. And if you haven't graduated yet, let us know that too. The second question is checking in with you. We've been doing this throughout the pandemic to see how people are holding up under rising and falling surges and lockdowns coming and going and everything else that happens. So I'd like to see how people are doing. And we'll close the poll in about 5 seconds. And so we have a experienced audience today, Laura. 2/3 of the audience are people with 5 or more years of experience. So that can give you some insight into who we're speaking with. And it's good to see that 90% or so of the audience said that they are doing well or at least okay. And for those of you in the third category, we hope that what Laura has to tell us today will improve your outlook. So with that said, I would like to give you a little background about Laura. Over 15 years of experience in engineering and business, and she specializes in helping the leaders of her bank turn their visions into reality and helping her team to support that. So it's a interesting process because it's both the process improvement side, but also the automation side, and those things are intertwined inseparably. So and she'll talk about that as we have our conversation. Welcome, Laura. If you want to give a little bit more of your background.
Thank you, Stuart. It's great to be here. So I'll give you the short version on my background, but I do have an engineering background where I did site development design. Then with economy changes, went to FedEx and worked at FedEx in multiple roles, including their quality driven management program, which is process improvement there, and was approached by First Horizon Bank to come and stand up the programs here at First Horizon for the process improvement program as well as the robotic process automation programs. And I started out in the operations. That's where we stood up these programs, is in the back office operations of the bank. And Stuart mentioned that we've recently completed a migration, which was subsequent to a merger of equals with Iberia Bank. And when that happened, I was promoted to lead the Enterprise RPA and process improvement programs for the joint banks. We did just complete our system migrations in February. And anybody that's been through that, know it is not for the faint of heart to go through that. And right at the end of it, on February 28th, it was announced that we had been acquired by TD Bank, which is takes us back into a whirlwind. That being said, we feel very, very prepared to go into this next stage of changes and challenges that we're going to go through, especially because we had just gone through that migration, and in fact we were still winding down on some of that. You always have some task after migration that you're going to have to clean up, et cetera. And so we've been doing that at the same time of refocusing and reinventing of what is our new norm, looking forward to being a part of TD Bank. So our objectives for our coming year and the next year have changed since that announcement, but we do feel better prepared to help the entire bank and go through these changes. And it's difficult for employees to just close one book looking forward to a little breather and then go back into another one. So my team is here to help them. We were able to really expose ourselves to a lot of different departments during this last migration. They began to learn what we could really do with process improvement and with automation and help them out. And we did indeed help out a lot of different departments. And now that they're starting to regain their footing, and they're also starting to look at the vision of where they need to go over the next year, they're continuously reaching out to us to help them and help really build some capacity creation, because in order to do these migration activities, you're pulling on the same employees that have their day jobs. And so they're reaching out to us, and that's where a lot of our focus is going now, Stuart. And we're excited about what we can continue to do for the employees of the bank and the customers to make these changes. We're also excited, by the way, by the acquisition and having bigger platforms and more products and offerings for our customers. So looking forward to it.
Yeah. And acquisition and mergers used to be, and still are, of course, you've just gone through it. It's a huge challenge, but in the past, there are actually examples of companies that almost went under because of the challenges of just merging the two different data processing systems back in the day when it was called data processing. And that kind of environment has changed now with the more rigorous understanding of lean principles, agile principles. Some of the folks on this call may not be familiar with lean. Can you describe what it is in your world?
Yes, lean is basically looking at your processes and identifying where the waste areas are and getting rid of the waste. And that improves your efficiency when you eliminate that waste. We go about it in a methodology that with a lot of training, a lot of lessons learned from a lot of people that preceded us in the lean world. But you can look at different categories of waste. One of the acronyms that's typically used is Tim Woods. T is for transportation. That's an interesting thing because I first began my lean training at FedEx, and that's how they make their money, right?
Yeah.
Transporting stuff from one place to another location. But we were trained that you need to try to eliminate that, or at least make it more efficient for people. So transportation, excess inventory is the I. M is motion, walking printers, delivering papers, all that kind of thing. The W is waiting when you're waiting for approvals or you're waiting for the products you need to be able to produce. You're just sitting there waiting. The first O is overproduction. If you're producing more than you need to. Second O is over processing. If you're have more strict guidance on your what you're having to do, or if you need 8 pages in a report but you're including 40, that's over processing. You can identify those, and I'm not going to tell those tricks, but
Mm-hmm.
I've had to know that people are actually looking at them or not, but we'll be happy to explain that offline sometime. But you can identify if people are actually looking at what you're producing all the time. The D is for defects. We all know that defects, we have to go back, rework. And so that's double work. And it's also frustrating for the employees and for customers. The S waste is skills, and that's underutilizing the skills of your staff. So those are some of the areas of waste that are traditionally looked at. Now, when I came to the bank and stood up the process improvement program here, and it's based on Lean and Six Sigma, some on Baldrige and a little Agile mix in, but I changed that acronym to Mr. Tim P. Woods, and you always got more waste. But when you combine in automation, what you start looking at is what is your staff doing that's manual and repetitive? If it's manual and repetitive, look at it and see if it actually needs to be done. And if it has to be done, really strongly consider automating that task. If it's rules based and the staff is just doing these things repetitively over and over and over again, that is prime for robotic process automation. And take a look at that, because it is a waste to have humans sitting there doing something that a bot can do, and we can have the humans going on to speaking nicely to our customers, etc. The P in the middle is printing. Believe it or not, there's still a lot of printing that goes on at companies. A lot of it's habit. Some of it may be thinking that you have to print, then you have to file it, then you have to store it for a certain amount of time. But in today's digital age, obviously that's not needed. And so those are some of the other areas of waste. So again, Lean is identifying those waste and getting rid of those waste. And all that time and that money and those resources that you save when you do that can now be used for full production, and your efficiency goes up a lot. The satisfaction from customers and employees when you lower defects, etc., and stop all the waiting time is phenomenal. You can see it almost immediately. I've done process reviews and process mapping where there's been 6 different levels of approvals. And so you can imagine if, a couple of those levels are on a week vacation in there, that extends out that waiting a long time. So you can get rid of a lot of wasted time.
Yeah, it's always frustrating when things have to go up higher than the necessary level of approval for that just last example you mentioned. But you were talking about the state of Lean today, and it makes me think of how we've evolved to this point. I have a good friend who has a company that is basically used the theme war on waste for a couple of decades now, and that kind of thinking has been codified into Lean. But also when you talk about quality, I mean, we had back in the 80s, we were hearing the idea quality is free, Philip Crosby, and the idea that if you do it right the first time, you will eliminate the need to do it over. You will eliminate the need to tell the customer why you didn't do it right the first time. And all of the other things that fall out of that equation. So the notion of quality is free is the idea that whatever you invest in quality, you'll make back manyfold in savings, not just of your time and resources, but also lost customers on the one hand, and new customers who are attracted to the quality on the other. And so extending that principle beyond the idea of the quality of the product to the quality of everything that you do within the company is a big evolution over time. Now your job is to apply the lean principles, robotic process automation in the bank to its processes to make things more efficient, to make the products higher quality, the customer interactions better. How have you also then applied those principles to your team? You have the Robotic Process Automation Center of Excellence within the bank, and it itself is an operation that can be the Mr. Tim P. Woods principles can apply to. And how have you done that?
It's been a very interesting journey because being a process improvement expert and all, after we got the RPA program stood up, I started realizing that I hadn't applied those principles to my own RPA program. And so what had happened, one of the key elements in when you're trying to make sure a process is optimally efficient is you have to standardize. You absolutely have to standardize.
Yeah.
It starts with folder structure in through processes and procedures, but you have to standardize. What I learned pretty quickly, my team now expands from California to Bangalore, India, and what I first notice is the file folders. It's very simple, right? But the file folders from one developer from another, their code would be named this in a folder, or their UAT would be in another folder, etc. And it was just way out away from lean. We weren't standardized. It was going to be an utter mess if we didn't get it straight, because you're going to have turnover, particularly when you have contractors, etc. And then you have that overlap of time of where you've got offshore time and onshore time, and developers need to be able to go quickly to their resources and not have to do a lot of hunting around in folders. That was one of the first things we did, as simple as that sounds, is develop our eight folder structure for our RPA team. So the process definition documents go in that folder. The code goes in this folder. The UAT goes in the UAT folder. The change orders go in the change order folder, and the packages go in the package folder. And again, as simple as that sounds, unless you institute it and you make sure that it's done, it will not be done. So fortunately, I saw this pretty early on, and we got a project, and we took all the existing folders and we transitioned them to our existing file folder structure. Moving on down the road, as we also developed templates, the user acceptance testing templates. We added to them a tab with a checklist for code review so we could standardize the code review, because the code review onshore was different than the code review offshore, and we needed it all standardized. So we put that in there. We created a form that's completed when there's a migration to production that gives all the information about what the change was that was being made, who's requesting it, etc., what assets are needed, all that. So we did all this standardization, and then we kept looking at it and asking for brainstorming from our team. And we've gotten so much great information, but we went on from that to now, even all our folders, we have a template folder, and within each of the 8 folder, they contain the other templates that are needed for that stage in RPA. So the PDD folder has the PDD template. The the code folder has the config file template. in there. The UAT folder has the UAT template in there, and the change order folder has the change order request template in there. So when the business analysts now go to create these folders, they're not sitting there manually creating them. And then everybody else on the team is manually going back to the template folder and grabbing this template and putting in there and grabbing that template and putting in there. We have it one place. They copy it, they paste it, put the name of the automation on there, and everything they need is right there in that folder. So that's a real basic, simple example of what we did. But we also went on from there. So we realized that in their coding, there were a lot of similar codes that needed to be put in, like to access mainframe. And so we wanted it just to be a grab and go, plug and play type setup. So we had the developers start creating custom activities that we have in our library. We also have multiple automations that are subsequent to some of our standard automations. But for instance, we have a logging automation that our automations, each of our individual automations will put what needs to be logged into the logging queue. We have a separate automation that picks it up and puts it in the business log and puts it in our official audit logs. And so that's outside, that's very standard. As we progressed on, we realized, and this is continuous. That's one thing about process improvement, right? It never ends, and that's why they call it continuous process improvement. So as we continued on, even with, for example, the logging automation, you have some automations that were processing thousands of transactions, and they clogged up the logging queue. And so we created different levels of high volume logging queue, low volume logging queue, so that those that had 20 that the business needed to see right away didn't get caught behind 1,000 that could wait. And so those are just some of the examples of what we've done to standardize within the RPA COA. We're continuing to do that. As a matter of fact, we continuously look at what are our questions that are coming back from our developers that keep coming back to the business analyst. And a lot of them are access questions, et cetera. And so we're working on improving our templates on the front end to capture that information, so we don't have that waste on the back end that's going to be asked, and then we're going to have to wait to get the information back from the business unit. So those are some examples, Stuart, of what we're doing. We're able to accomplish a lot more with a lot less, but we're also able to get our turnaround time very quickly. And that's essential when you're going through a migration or a merger, because you need to be able to help people quickly.
Yeah, it's also really essential in a heavily regulated industry like banking, because you never know when the next big law is going to come out, or regulation is going to come out, like Sarbanes-Oxley or something like that, that's going to require you to change all sorts of ways that you do business to meet that new standard, right?
Right. I think it simplifies changes like that a whole lot, because again, we're standardized. So if we need to make this change, we know where we need to make it, or if it's multiple points, where the multiple points are. We recently, right after the migration and the acquisition announcement, we experienced our first internal audit. Oh, wow, that's fun. No, it really was a pleasure, because I work very collaboratively with the audit team and the compliance and SOX and everything. So I mean, I approached it and I told my team to approach it. We need to learn from them. We give them everything they want. We got to listen and improve upon it. I think that working collaboratively all this time, for these past 3 years, was just very, very instrumental in helping us come through that audit, with flying colors. And also we knew when we were asked for, we had this spreadsheet of all the ask of the information they needed, knew exactly where to get it and provided it back. And so that helped a whole lot. No hunt and peck and try to find and all that kind of thing going on. So that was very helpful.
Mm-hmm. It's it's when we talk about banking environment being subject to audits and that type of thing, that's kind of a generally applicable idea now out in the world that our audience is in. People are working in, for example, digital marketing now have to worry about the GDPR um, regulations from Europe about privacy of data, and the things that you used to be able to do, you can't do anymore. But even beyond that, if you're using Google Analytics as part of your suite, or if you're using Google's advertising services and digital marketing services, you have no idea how the algorithms are changing. So you have to be uh, responsive to changes that you don't even know are happening. And it's an interesting exercise in being agile and applying the principles of, if our operation is organized around lean principles, and that gives us the ability to respond quicker without wasting time and resources on unnecessary tasks, we have more ability to respond to these challenges and changes in our environment and adapt to them. Is that, would you say that that's a generally applicable principle across, pretty much all digital industry?
I can't speak for all the digital industries, but I would think so. Yes. I just know in working with all the different departments that I work with, the different teams I work with, and the challenges that they have when they have, let's say, 20 different people, and the 20 different people are doing something 20 different ways, and
Right.
someone comes in and asks for something, they get answers like, well, it depends on if Mary's doing it or if John's doing it. If Mary does it, it'll be there. If John does it, it'll be there. And you see where it starts going around, and it becomes extremely inefficient and frustrating, by the way, for
Mm-hmm.
the people asking for the information. And so I think it would be applicable. Certainly, I think even in smaller businesses, the same application can apply. If you have standard processes, it's sort of like when you walk into your house at night. If you lay your keys different places every day, you're going to spend time going to search for your keys, and instead of just having a place you put your keys when you come in, then you go get your keys there. Same type of principle of standardizing, make something a routine, and then you know where to go to get something, but you also know where to go to adapt something. And troubleshooting is in there, in a digital world, right? That's
Yeah.
part of everyday life. In the robotic process automation side of the house is monitoring and troubleshooting. And so having these lean principles of waste and standardization, we have definitive processes that we go through when there are issues and things that we look at. And we can go back to our resources of our logging, our standard logging, et cetera, and track down pretty quickly where we might be able to fix something.
Yeah. Um, so I think, is this the time that you wanted to ask the audience about their personal position in the RPA journey?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
great, Stuart.
Let me bring up that poll for people, and I'll also put it on the screen in a moment, but there's a couple of questions that Laura would like to ask you about. Make sure this is right. Yeah. Where are you in your career journey in Lean, and where are you in your career journey with RPA, Robotic Process Automation? So let me pull that up. So we'll let the poll go for a few more seconds. Okay, and 3, 2, 1. Here's the responses. So in RPA, about 40% of the audience hasn't started, but the rest of the audience is in that journey right now, whether they're at the beginning of the journey or whether they're far along in it. In Lean, it's people tend to be farther along. There's fewer people who said they haven't started yet. And can you then tell us about where you see the bank going in its journey and in your, maybe in your personal journey?
Yeah, I alluded to some of the changes we're looking at now in our direction. Prior to the acquisition announcement, our plans for 2022 post migration was to really build out our citizen developer program for RPA, and also to keep improving our efficiencies with the RPA department. For our Lean program, we also had plans of spreading out into the enterprise and taking on some bigger end-to-end process improvements, the more challenging ones. A lot of times, what you have in especially large enterprises is you have a silo effect. And so you have these different teams in these different departments, and all these silos have to connect together, and they don't do it as efficiently as it can be done if you look at it from an end-to-end view, and get those processes improved. We've turned that back around now because we really don't want what we're calling throwaway work. We don't want to spend the next 6 months on something, on a process that's going to go away the first quarter of 2023. And
Yeah.
so for our journey with, I'll speak to Lean first. We have several very large process improvements that have been underway that are continuing. We're continuing to add that benefit to different teams in the bank. Those that are still applicable, we are continuing on with those, and really focusing on those again to give those teams that lift that they need. So we have those improvements going on. We're looking with a very critical eye when we're seeing these come in, of is there time left as we are to see the benefit from continuing on? And if they are, then we're continuing on. If not, then we're taking our resources and looking at the other areas that we will be able to get that interim benefit from our resources, so that we're not just wasting our resources. So on the Lean side, that's where the direction we're headed on the Lean side. On the RPA side, as I've alluded to before, we are having a lot of the teams come to us and helping us, help getting us to automate different tasks and processes they have. And that's in addition to the ones that we already have that are running in production. I anticipate that over the next, I'd say 6 months, that we're going to see a lot more of those type of requests coming into us, so that these teams can take those manual repetitive tasks off their employees, so that those employees will be freed up in Q1 of 2023 when we go to actually start with this fully into this acquisition.
I have a question, and I think it relates to one of the questions that has come in, and we'll talk about it maybe more in the Q&A, but as preliminary discussion, you have people on your team that you hire because of their expertise in lean and process improvement, and then you have people on your team that you hire because they have expertise in coding, software development, using the tools. For that latter category, how do you bring them up to speed with understanding lean principles and becoming proficient and part of the culture of your center of excellence?
That's interesting, because I don't do it in a straightforward, these are lean principles, and this is what we're doing, because the RPA COE program is here and the lean process program is over here. That what they do learn, though, is the identifying the difference in it, in that when we're asked to do an automation, and let's say for our business analysts, they start talking to the business, and we have some that are in flight right now, but they talk to the business and they find out, well, we get these requests and they come in from individuals in all different formats in Outlook. And so they recognize that we have to go to the lean side, we have to go to the process improvement side and get that front end process improved. And so they know to put this over to us on the process improvement side and let us get that front end standardized and improved, so that we can then automate on the back end. As far as our culture in our RPA COE, we talk very, very frequently. Even though we're from California to Bangalore, India, we have a culture of collaboration and camaraderie on our team that preceded COVID. So prior to COVID, we met virtually with our cameras on once a month for our Bot Builders virtual social, and we visited and we developed that culture of getting to know one another. Getting back to the lean portion of it and process improvement, we also have monthly lessons learned that are, again, of a global nature, from California to Bangalore, and we get on and share the lessons learned so that we can repeat those. During our we have twice a week, we have scrums, global scrums, with the offshore and onshore developers and the BAs. And during those scrums, we have even done the process improvements we have, when we go through the scrums, we have the percentage complete. They know they're going to be asked certain questions. We finish in 15 minutes. We're done with that. Then when we start looking at our solution design, we have a weekly solution design review, and we look at that of streamlining it and getting waste out of the designs even before they go to development. So it's not so much a focused training of, we're going to train you on lean, as it is embedded into our culture as an RPA COE.
Excellent. Yeah, you told me an anecdote in one of our conversations about a case of over processing at FedEx, and I bring it up because you just talked about how you streamlined your scrums to be done in 15 minutes. Can you tell me about the experience you had with the 150-page report that had to be presented to people every month?
Yeah. So that was at FedEx. Okay, now Stuart is getting in here. He's digging on in because he's wanting me to tell my tricks, right? But this is applicable. So there was about 170 slides, and basically the main core of it was 35 or 40 slides with the red, yellow, and green dashboards that just stuck out at the executives, and that's what the executive want to see. Well, then back in the appendix, there are all these hundred or so slides that are intricate, metrics, and I had to do the quality control on it, and all these. Well, if you ask people if they need something, they are going to tell you they need something. Here's the trick. You just and I was told this by, I'm not going to say who, but this trick is, we would have the date that these slides were updated. And so if it's May of 2022, we'd say, updated April 10th, 2022. And so when we suspected that this information was not being looked at by anyone, we would go a month and not update it. And then we go 2 months and still not update it. Now, 3 months, it's 3 months old, nobody's noticed, we just pull it out. And if somebody needed it, certainly, we would put it back in, but it was a pretty good sign of being able to know that nobody is looking at this. Stuart, as long as Stuart's pulling this out of me, I'll tell you one time I did a weekly report for 2 years once in engineering that no one ever asked for. And so I think in most people's worlds, when you bring up these kind of things, they can go back into their world and realize that there are some things that they do that aren't that nobody's looking at. And so you have to start looking at why are we doing this, and how can we determine if they really are. Again, if you ask people if they're looking at your great report you send out, they're going to say they are, but are they really? So you get creative and figure out if they're really looking at it or not.
Yeah, and the thing that you just mentioned, why are we doing this, is really one of the most important questions you can ask when you're looking at streamlining your processes and eliminating waste, is because you often will hear the answer, because we always did it that way, because somebody who was here started doing it that way, and we've just decided that must be the way it's supposed to be done, and no one's ever thought about it beyond that. And it's your job in the lean program for the bank and the RPA program to think about, why are people doing this, and is this something that serves the purpose of the bank and its customers, or is it just something that upholds a strange ritual or a tradition that among the people inside the bank? So um,
Yeah. It's a
there's
good point, Stuart. We have a tool in our lean toolbox called the 5 whys, and when I'm training people that in lean, and you get that type of answer, why are you doing this way? Because that's the way it's always been done. Well, you got to go a lot farther than that. Why? And a lot of times it's outdated, and you don't need to do it at all. It doesn't need to be improved. It just needs to be obliterated. Right.
right.
So, yeah.
um, I'm going to mention one example, I think, that it illustrates how pervasive, how far-reaching the idea of quality and um, lean processes can go. And this is kind of an odd example, but it's from Baptist Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee. And it's one of the acknowledged to be one of the highest quality healthcare systems. And the CEO likes to show a film of how everyone in the hospital is involved in delivery of healthcare. And one of the segments in that video is one of the housekeepers. And, what's your job here? And the housekeeper says, my job is to create a clean and pleasant environment in which the patient can heal. And that's, if you look at most people, when they look at an organization chart or they think about job functions, they think about the tasks that people do. But it's important to understand why those tasks are happening and what the bigger purpose is for the organization that those tasks fulfill. Because if you don't know why you're doing something and you're just doing it repetitively, like you said, if it's a manual repetitive process that you don't understand a purpose behind, you're not going to really pay attention to the quality of it. But if you understand the purpose, you can even do things like, well, you know what? I've always thought if we did this different tool, or if we took this different step, we could do it better. And those kinds of improvements can flow up from the production floor all the way up to the top of the organization. So with that in mind, what are some of the ways that lean principles can help people in the audience improve their value in their work and their potential value to their current or future employers, or in other career paths that they might choose?
And I'll just tell you how it's helped me in my career is when I first began to learn about lean. Of course, I was an individual contributor, so I had control over my desk, part of my desk, right? but how, not what I did, but how I did some in some areas. And so I knew that I couldn't control what was going on out in the rest of the enterprise or the company, but I could control my own work and my own throughput and how I conducted myself during the day to get that done. As I started applying some of these lean principles of standardizing, of eliminating waste, of simplifying, and my throughput went up a lot. And when I first started doing it, I was working in the engineering world, so I was billable by the hour. And particularly for projects that were a set fee project, I could do it in less time than somebody else could because of these standardizations and these waste eliminations. And so that literally improved my value from a dollar standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
When I went to FedEx and I had certain tasks I had to do by deadlines, etc., and I've applied those same principles of eliminating the waste and performing those tasks, I was able to get those done with less errors, more efficiently. If I was asked for a report impromptu because I did some very, very archaic type automations with just what we had, but I was able to turn that back around quicker. So again, improving that value as an individual contributor. Then, of course, as you go on and into management and you start at looking at your teams and other departments, again, you're able to, we look at it as a total economic impact, and there's 5 different parts of that. First of all, there's the rate of return on investment, which is your easy to figure out dollar signs. I say 5 hours and it's so much an hour, then I've saved such and such amount. Those are the straightforward, and that's usually what a lot of people look at. But you also have to look at, when you're looking at the total economic impact of what you're doing and how you're improving processes, you have to look at improving employee satisfaction, so it's just decreasing turnover. That's very hard to measure, but you can get it from surveys and just observations, feedback. Customer experience improvement is big. That's also hard to monetize sometimes, but that's important. The elimination of errors and defects that's part of your total economic impact, because you're not having to rework it. In a world like ours, you're not getting fines and penalties, et cetera, applied to these processes. And then lastly, which is one that what we look at a lot, especially now going through this past merger and with this acquisition coming on, is the capacity creation. And so if you're doing these process improvements and or the automations, and you're increasing the amount that can be done with the same amount of staff or less, then your value has just gone up in your company. I know in most industries today, we're challenged in backfilling and getting staffing, and there's turnover, and then in some cases people are hired even on a contractor basis. They get another job before they even come, et cetera. And so we're having to be more efficient. We're having to get our work done and get it done better with less resources. And so I think in those ways, whether it's at your desk level or at management level, hopefully that you'll be able to see the value you create for your enterprises.
Great. As you were mentioning the customer experience, I think one specific example I'll pull forward of how lean principles can apply in another area that we don't necessarily think of it. But in UI UX design, user experience and user interfaces, understanding what is important for the user to see and what fulfills the tasks that they're trying to accomplish with your application versus what's useless or wasted time or distracting or that type of thing. That's really an important aspect of that practice, so that what you create is a pleasant and delightful experience for the customer rather than a frustrating one where they have to do extra steps or fill in information that they don't really think is necessary for them to share, or that they know you're not going to use. And so that, I think, is a kind of a direct example of how acquiring knowledge and understanding of lean principles can be applied, in another area, in addition to the areas that you talked about. So I think we're at a point in our conversation where it's time to take up some questions from the audience. And we've got a few that are lined up. We've got, let me see if I can get this to appear on my screen. Reem asks a very general question, but it's a great question, which is, how do you know where in your business processes you should improve so that you can get happy customers and a successful company?
That I'm asked that a whole lot. Where do you start? And the number one, and something that you alluded to, Stuart, is the customer defines the quality. And so ask your customer or listen to your customers when they're coming to you and they want something or they have a complaint, or whatever. Listen to that and start with your customer's quality. You absolutely have to focus on the customer and what they want. Now, that being said, as you get into the internal part of an enterprise, you get all those different nuances in the internal processes going on. So what I tell people is where you start is you start by making a list. And that's how I started here at the bank, and it's how I recommend other people to start. You make a list of what are all the opportunities. People will start coming to you and go, well, I've thought about doing this, and this process needs to be improved, and make your list, so write it down. Put in there who told you that. Believe it or not, when you start getting a lot of them, you forget who told you what and suggested what. But that's how we started out, and how I started out with the bank. And then on that beginning list, I began to see, well, some of it needs to go to a process improvement, and some of it's just manual and repetitive, has to be done. It's essential, and that just needs to go to RPA. And so with that initial list, see, we started saying RPA, process improvement. We started getting that lined out. From that came our two separate lists of opportunities. One is for the lean process improvement, and one is for the RPA. And we use that to this day. We put the opportunities identified on those lists, and then we have a prioritization process that we go through in different phases that we go through of assessing what they are, what the impact is it customer experience improvement, employee experience improvement, capacity creation, ROI, error prevention, et cetera. And we go through that, and we prioritize these up through these lists. And that's how we keep our pipelines going. But it all starts out with that one essential list, and decide, is it process improvement, lean process improvement needed, or is it automation improvement needed? Now, that being said, we had some that were both.
Yeah.
In our back office operations, we had an immediate need to take this manual repetitive off, and we had this longer term need of improving a process from start to finish. And so we gave them the lift in back office operations of automating what they were having to currently do, and at the same time doing that longer term process improvement.
Mm-hmm. Regis asks about applying lean principles in a startup environment, where the changes are very rapid, where you don't have a lot of time to deal with things. Now, can you kind of compare that to the kind of time crunches that you end up with in the bank, and things like coping with deadlines for mergers and other types of important time bound processes?
Yeah, I can. And it's interesting, with the startup, and it's going rapidly, and a lot of processes are being put in place at one time, and they have to be put in place simultaneously, and all the wheels are going, and everything. That in some ways is very similar to standing up two programs, even though it was at a 150-year-old bank, brand new, everything was going fast. You had to get this turned around and starting it. The way I would address it in a startup is to look at the standardization portion of it, and also what is essential, whether it's a startup or an enterprise, is having your backup plans, in contingency plans for business continuity if a particular entity left. In startup, if you don't want this person to leave and all that knowledge of theirs go out the door, and how this process is going on. So it's very critical there too. So I would look at standardization and making sure that there's some documentation in place, so that you can have your business continuity going on. If an entity was sick, or left and decided they didn't like the startup, and left, that you don't have this gigantic hole going on there. But that goes back to a lot of the lean principles of standardizing, documenting, and looking at it from a waste standpoint. Don't even start a process that you're going to be manual and repetitive. If you can avoid that particular process, do it. If you can buy an out of the box software that does it for you, then you eliminate having to go back later and change it. Does that answer that, Stuart?
Yeah, and that leads into another question that Shajish had, which is, How easy is it to adopt RPA? I mean, is it something that you'd recommend, you know, training up in-house talent to do it, or going with an outsourcer? What situations would those two different scenarios apply?
Yeah, we kind of did a hybrid of those two. So we had consultants come in, 4 consultants on site for 9 weeks to help us work with the different stakeholders and stand up our program and the policies and procedures, et cetera. And then when they left, we trained 2 in-house people to do automations. What we found with that was our demand was so much heavier on our time that we could not take the time to continue to train in-house. So I think that's got to be a lot of the decision of what you decide to do is how much time and how much money do you have. If you, and also the skill set of your in-house talent, do they have the skill set where they can learn RPA and apply it, and then are they going to be there to monitor and maintain it? So I think it depends on the, like I said, the level of what you've got in house, what your demands are going to be. If you've got a lot of different demands on your time, you're not going to want to take the time to bring your developers up from ground zero up. I know as our program has grown, even when we've looked at when we got to be between 40 and 50 automations in production, then we had to look at how much time our monitoring was taking. Just to you don't, these aren't one and done situations. You don't automate something and they're out the door and that they're there for life. You have to monitor them in production. If something fails, you have to go in and do troubleshooting, et cetera. And so when we started growing and we were looking at that same question of do we want to build our monitoring team in-house and maintain that in-house, or do we want to outsource that and bring it in? What we had to look at was the time that our existing team we didn't have the time to go train that monitoring person. And then what happens if they're on vacation? Then we had to pull developers or somebody else in to monitor for them. If they leave, then we have to pull our resources from all our different areas. So in that decision, we outsourced that monitoring and still do. So I think that's a lot. Some of the decisions that have to be made is what you're actually, the scale you're looking at and what you anticipate as coming in. And I think you have to stay adaptable. Like I said,
Yeah,
we started out one way and realized pretty quickly that we were going to have to grow a different way. Our model has worked out well. We have some in-house developers, we have some contracted developers, we have right now our business analysts are in-house, but we have supplemented them during the migration with resourced outsourced business analysts. Our monitoring is outsourced. And so I think you just got to always be aware of what your supply and demand is on your internal resources. If you don't keep that in mind when you're building your model and just making these decisions, and if you don't stay adaptable and agile in the ability to be able to change how your model works, as you grow and your demand on your time for monitoring, enhancing, even once a year you have software upgrades and all your automations in production have to be tested before that is done. If you don't stay in an adaptable framework and continuously reviewing what your program is doing, you could go belly up.
yeah. I think what you've talked about just addressed a lot of the question that you asked about the doing a kind of a build or buy decision between automating a process with with a custom automation, or looking for a product on the market that'll do the same thing for you. Um, by the way, do you have she also has one comment. She says she's going to use your tip about the legacy deck and not updating it, because she also has a legacy deck that has a lot of useless information in it. But you talk about build or buy. Is that pretty much really the same kind of conversation as in-house versus outsourcing?
Yes, and absolutely it does. And for us at the bank, the build or buy, a lot of that goes back to our IT department and what's available. And does it have the out of box services? Do they have everything that's needed? Now that being said, even on a lot of our systems that have been bought and our platforms that have been bought, there are gaps in between the systems that normally an API would fill, but it's going to take too long to get an API, so we get a bot and we get
Yeah.
the bot in there. And if the API, was built, then we just turn off the bot, and so it just is a matter of whether that platform is going to provide what you need. We have internal in our RPA COE, we had a platform that we used, and we didn't re-up because we realized that some of what we needed was not in the platform. We were still doing a lot of wasteful copying, pasting, try to get back and forth in between our platforms, and so we built in-house on that, ended up doing that.
We have a few more questions if you have time, Laura.
Mhm.
Okay. I think one of the most important is from Alexis. Do you have suggestions on getting management to buy into and adopt lean principles and RPA?
Yeah, that is one of the most challenging things that you're going to come up against. It really is. Coming from FedEx, Fred Smith was the person that drove their quality program, their Lean Six Sigma Baldrige program.
And he was the founder of the company. Yeah.
He was, yes. His employee number is number one at FedEx. He was the founder of the company. And if Mr. Smith said it's done, then that is done. And so that was very spoiling for me, because that's what you need on a process improvement program. You need that type of buy-in from the very top, or you can be wasting your time. And so one way though that you can do that, and I've been challenged with some of that here at the bank, is by showing what you can do this slower, right, than having a Mr. Smith say, this is what we're
Right.
going to do. And part of your bonus, by the way, is based on being able to achieve this. And so what I've done here at the bank is a slower approach, but just demonstrating what we do with process improvements. And so it's coming along, but it's far more preferable to have that upper executive buy-in. They will listen to your metrics. You've absolutely got to have your metrics in place. So you get those metrics in place and make sure. Here's another point when you're going to get that executive buy-in and try to get them aboard. Make sure your metrics are respected by the people in your company that the executives respect. So, and by that I mean, don't just pull an hourly number from, Jamie over here at the next desk or whatever. Make sure it's from your HR, your finance department. I meet monthly with our finance department to make sure that these metrics are in line with what they view as being reasonable. And because you've got to have that. If you get your buy-in with a bad metric, they're going to buy out. And
Yeah.
so the metrics are very, very paramount. Another thing is to identify those processes and those pain points that are important to the executives. And so you've got to be able to identify those pain points, and you approach those pain points. if they're not important to the executives, the pain points that you're relieving, it doesn't really matter. It does matter, but it's not going to get you executive buy-in. As far as if you improve that how can I help and how can I demonstrate with metrics that can be validated that I actually these process improvements achieved what we expected them to achieve and hopefully more.
And Dinesh asks a related question about how to convince a customer to apply lean, and give up, processes that they become comfortable with. And it seems to me that the same advice applies in terms of, showing them the benefits, focusing on solving pain points. How do you do that in the bank with your customers if you're going to change a process that's going to affect how an external customer works with you?
I haven't at the bank done that because I deal with the internal operations. At
Uh-huh.
FedEx, I did that. And it was a very interesting process, but basically one of the last process improvement projects I did was with one of FedEx's largest medical suppliers. And we were working through some processes that needed improved and worked very collaboratively with them, both in calls and on-site meetings with the customer. When we did that, we taught them about the quality driven management program. We did process maps. We worked through the pain points. We brainstormed, and at the end of it, it was a very good collaborative engagement. And at the start of it, it was not, it was not. But the customer had pains, and we listened and we addressed them with the process improvement program. And when we alleviated their pains, that again, that was what was important to them, and that's what influenced them. Is when they started seeing us alleviate their pain, then they listened and they adopted what we were doing and integrated that and working with us. I don't think I don't think you're going to be real impactful by just preaching. I
Yeah.
think you've got to demonstrate to the customer. You've got to show them a value the same way you do with the executives in the place that they have pain.
Friday has a question. He's a consultant. He's a coach and a Lean Six Sigma black belt. And he asked if you have advice on how to use Six Sigma in coaching people.
It's interesting because I got my training at the same time I did lean training. I did Six Sigma, although it was two separate trainings. So all mine is just kind of a big mush posh in there.
Yeah.
But so in Six Sigma, you have the DMAIC process, which is define, measure, analyze, improve, control. And so and even in my program, it's Six Sigma is joined into the lean principles, etc. When I'm going through a process improvement, I go through that Six Sigma process. We've named it our own circular, inside the
Uh-huh.
bank, but it is that define, measure, analyze, improve, control process of where you start looking at the process, and you've got to really study the process. And one of the issues that you come up with when you start dealing with teams on process improvements is they always want to jump to the solution, and you can't jump to the solution. You have to go through that cycle and those phases of really studying what the process is and not jumping to a solution, because the problem may not be the root cause, may not be the root cause you thought when you
Yeah.
initially started. But if you go through that define, measure, analyze, improve, control process, and that methodology of documenting the process, reviewing the process, really get into the root causes, that's where you really get your value in there.
Yeah, and when you talk about root causes, it reminds me of the old riddle about, the truck that gets stuck under a bridge because it's about 1 inch lower than the clearance of the truck. And, whole crews of emergency personnel and construction workers come out and they figure out, well, are we going to cut into the bridge or are we going to disassemble the truck? And a little boy whispers to one of the members, I know how to fix this. And finally, they turn to the little boy and say, what would you do? And the little boy says, I'd let some air out of the tires of the truck. And that really is where you have to say the root cause isn't the fact that the bridge is too low for the truck or the truck is too high for the bridge. The solution can be found in changing the dimensions, the parameters of the problem. So, that kind of creative thinking is really important. And you did mention documentation. We did have one question about what tools you use for documentation in your team.
Yeah, for process maps, we use Visio for process maps. And for other documentation, like our process definition document is just a Word template that we use, a simple Word template. We take the process maps out of Visio and embed them in. We use simple tools for our UAT template. We have in Excel, and that's another tool. But we've looked at using different tools, but because we are so regulated bank, some of these high functioning recording tools, etc., that will produce your PDD and your process maps all out there, we were not comfortable with the security on everything that was being recorded, quite frankly, for a bank. And so we do use our simpler tools.
Makes sense. So with that, I'm going to move on. I think I apologize to anybody whose questions we didn't get to, but we are a little over time. And so I'm going to move on to the next phase. I did want to mention that we had some people who asked about how to find recordings of our webinars, previous webinars. And I'd like to just point people to our YouTube channel. And I think I can put that in the chat. But if you go to our YouTube channel, the webinars tend to be in the Simplilearn live section. You can do a search on those. And a Google search, you can often find them as well. We'll do this one last poll for the audience. And we ask about the different things that folks in the audience are interested in learning. So we'll start that. And I will mention one of the courses that Simplilearn offers is, in fact, the Introduction to Robotic Process Automation. So I will put a link to that into the chat as well. And give you the opportunity to go to the homepage for that. Let me get that into the chat. Here we go. And you'll also be able to find at our website courses in Agile, Scrum, Lean principles, and that type of thing. So with that, show the poll results. People today, no surprise, are interested in the business and project management domain, but also data science, AI, and product management. So with that said, and with about 40% of the audience saying they'd like to start right away, please do come to our website, or if you have specific questions about courses or that type of thing, you can email the contact information from the invitation you received, I'm going to mention Laura's book, which is coming out in August of 2022. Laura, do you want to describe what Lean Mission is about?
It's the book I wish I had when I was standing up the process improvement and RPA programs at the bank. It's not theoretical. It's it's the kind of information of where do we start? Start your list, that kind of thing. What do we look at? What are the different phases that you go through in the process improvement and also in RPA? So a hands-on book, very practical book.
Keep an eye out for that. It's going to be coming out, and I'm going to put the link that's at the bottom for Laura's LinkedIn. That's in the chat now as well, so you can just click on that. And with that, I'd like to say thank you to Laura for a really marvelous conversation. It was, as always, a pleasure speaking with you and learning from you.
My pleasure, Stuart. I enjoyed it as always.
Okay. And I'd like to let the audience know that we will be having another webinar next Tuesday on a different topic, but one that should interest everybody here and maybe all of their friends. Here is a session with Carmen Bryant, who was the Director of Marketing at Indeed, and she will be able to share with you how to work the job boards like Indeed and Glassdoor and that type of thing to get the best results, make the most out of your job search. So if you are looking for a job, or if you are considering a job shift, or if you know people who are, please let them know about this webinar, and the link is in the chat. As I mentioned, we have, I'll do it one last time. I'll put the link to the Robotic Process Automation course. And with that, I think we conclude our webinar today. So thank you, Laura, again, and thank you to everybody for being here. Please follow us on our social media channels at Simplilearn on Facebook and Twitter. We're on LinkedIn under Simplilearn, and we look forward to welcoming you into the Simplilearn Learner community, as well as seeing you at future Simplilearn webinars. So thanks again, and thank you, Laura.
You're welcome, Stuart. Have a great day.
Okay, and that concludes our webinar today.